All right, so let's kind of get started. So a little bit of what we were talking about before is that I'm going to skip through this because this is just the intro. But basically, we're going to do what we call the success model and the ACE model, and we're going to talk about building trust and multiple offers. We definitely want to spend a good amount of time on multiple offers, so I'm not going to go too fast, but I am going to zip through the models so we can get to that last chunk and have enough time. So make sure you guys are chatting with me. And we talked about, models are just a simple path to kind of get you through, and they just take practice, right? So you've seen this, we kind of showed you this example yesterday. All right, so we talked about the debrief a little bit. BATNA is really, it's that what is their backup plan, best alternative to negotiated agreements. And we also talked about SAM, which is the stand area of concern, and then the motivator. So let's just dig right in. So the first model today, and if you guys are in your workbook, it is on page 10. And the success. So self-interest, uniqueness, contrast, communication, exchange, sameness, and sound logic. So the reason why we use success model, you'll see, is that we really want to get clarification on how we can negotiate, how we can get in to negotiation so we have leverage on the other person. Not leverage as like blackmail or, hostile situation, but we want to see what parts and pieces we can use as an emotional motivator for them to make the right decision. Again, if it's a listing or a buyer, or if you're negotiating a contract. So let's kind of dive into each chunk, but it is, so the first one, yep, go ahead.
So I downloaded the presentation, but where's the workbook?
I have it. Do you want me to put it in the chat box?
Yes, please.
I have to be able to do that. Chat, file.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, so you should be able, it's uploading into the chat box now, okay? So download that PDF and you should be good to go. All right, so self-interest all the way through. So this is the first one. So the first part of this model is you've got to convince them that it's for their own interest. So I always say an example of, as an adult, you never want to be told what to do. What's that movie? Oh, Dirty Dancing. Don't put baby in the corner. Have you ever watched that movie? Right? So you haven't watched that movie, Verdice? What are you talking about? All right. So self-interest really is, I think a lot of times when we're in negotiation, we're telling people what to do. We talked about a little bit about yesterday, is that we need to make sure that they're thinking about what their best interests are. So bringing up their motivation of why they wanted to buy or sell the property, or why they hired you, but you need to really bring up their self-interest. So I put keywords at the bottom, like if you're in a conversation with somebody, hey, the reason to hire me would be because you want to make more profit on your house, right? Yes. Well, we want to sell it in the quickest amount of time because we need to get to Florida, correct? So make sure you're using the S for self-interest. You need to put their words and put the self-interest in the part of the conversation, because remember, if you go into the questions, that's where their frontal lobe lights up and they're like, oh, yes, that is why I want to sell because I want to make $25,000 or different things like that. So this is my dog's like peak an hour, I've noticed. All right, uniqueness. So is the second one. Offer something that makes this deal or contract unique. So let's just talk about this in the sense of you're presenting an offer, right? So an example would be you represent the buyer, you're sending it to the listing agent. You need to point out the uniqueness in your offer, right? It's not it's at full price. It's what's unique, what makes your offer better than another offer that they potentially had. So make sure that you're talking about something that brings up the fact that in your negotiation, if you choose my offer, or if you choose me, this is a much more unique opportunity. Does that make sense? So these two, have you guys used this in negotiations about bringing up self-interest or uniqueness in offers in the past? unmute yourself and give me some examples of things. Maybe you've done this. Maybe you've done this in relationship negotiations. Maybe you've done this in child or parenting negotiations. But what have you used with these first two SUs to kind of feel like you've connected with the start of this model? Anything? Nothing? Remember, this is a participation workshop. Drew's doing all the talking. Am I going to call on somebody?
This kind of ties in with your unique value proposition.
It
I
does.
feel like the uniqueness in particular.
So that's a great when you're negotiating on a listing appointment, right? You're actually pulling your unique value proposition out and says, yes, everybody charges 6% commission. Let's just use that generally because there's antitrust laws. And then, okay, everybody does drone shots or everybody does staging and photography. But what I do differently is X, Y, Z, right? So I agree with that. Perfect. All right, let's keep going. I'm going to ask for more participation, right? I know it's early. You guys got your coffee, hopefully. All right, so the two C's of success is contrast and communication. So show them data or value of pricing comparison versus other homes as an example. Contrast, so offer price versus selling price, buyer closing costs versus actual closing costs when you're looking at things like that. So if you're in negotiation with somebody, and I would say closing costs. So you can say, you know, I'm offering full price, but I need $5,000 in closing costs. And the listing agent says, we're not paying $5,000 in closing costs. In contrast, negotiation would say, well, I did a CMA, and I don't know if you're aware, but the two houses that just closed down the street actually had $5,500 in concessions. So according to the CMA that I've actually provided to my buyer, we're actually slightly under what the market was. So do you see how the contrast is? So rather than defending that my buyer needs $5,000 in closing because they're a first-time home buyer and they don't have any money in the bank, I'm going to use the contrast negotiation as, well, they did it down the street. So, and a lot of times the listing agent doesn't know that, or if they did, they did the CMA so far long ago. Does that make sense? So using a contrast example is really important. Another example of it is you're kind of creating an offer, right? So the buyer says, I don't want to pay more than $230 for the house. Well, you're obviously going to do a CMA before you write the offer. And you say, I understand you want to do an offer of $230, but I pulled up a very similar house down the street. It sold for $235. So that's a comp, and the listing agent knows that. So they're going to compare our offer to some of the sold comps. And that's going to either justify them accepting our offer, countering our offer, or rejecting it. So what do you think the best decision for us to do to make a competitive offer? Because we know it's such a tight market in this neighborhood. You see how the contrast method really helps you kind of, it cuts in my opinion, cuts the legs from the person that's trying to push back at your negotiation. And then communication, this really one is really talking inside success, is that make sure that if it's all about this breakdown of trust, is that if you're delivering bad news or something that you know, then when you're negotiating, they're not going to be happy with, you need to be able to do it in a way that really gets you in front of them. Zoom is now a great way to do it. Nobody likes news delivered via email or text message because there's no emotion in that, right? It doesn't know if you care or you don't care, and it's unestablished. So inside the success model with the second C is make sure you could be saying the right things, the right scripts. You could be using SAM model. You could be using all these other models that we've coached you through, but then you deliver it in an email. You've just completely obliterated your opportunity to negotiate at a high level, because we know negotiation involves emotion, right? We talked about that disc yesterday. We talked about how people interact and engage in a different way. So make sure if you have an opportunity to negotiate, because if you're at the end of a transaction, right, you've been texting and emailing, maybe your counter offers back and forth, and you're kind of at the end, and maybe you're at a walk away approach, and the guy's like, this is take it or leave it, this is my final offer, right? And then your buyer says, I want to counter one more time, and you're like, ooh, this is not going to go well, right? You need to probably pick up the phone this time, Rather than texting or emailing like you've done the last 3 or 4 counter offers, picking up the phone is going to allow you to, again, build that trust, get something where you know that there's a high conflict situation and you're going to try to build some resolve around it. So have you ever used contrast, and what do you feel about communication inside of these two models? Again, have you have examples of either one of these in your world? Does anybody ever use contrast?
Well, basically in life, it makes things a little bit easier when someone has a different idea than you.
Yep.
You can explain the benefits and the values versus them going in a different direction or them having their own opinion.
And that's the biggest thing, is it's opinion versus fact, right? So
Right.
me saying an example with contrast, my buyer needs $5,000 in closing costs, rather than me bringing that up, and I actually bring up a contrast, which is, hey, when I did the comps, there was already 2 houses that had $5,000 in concession. He can't argue with me. Like, that's a fact. He can argue with me, well, can't he borrow money from his mom, or can he just bump the price up $4,000, right? So it kind of, again, I love that you said that, because you have to find a way to get through that part where, as humans, we're it doesn't say compare, it says contrast, right? So you can kind of see how that's important. Good. What about communication? Do you guys think when you're negotiating, especially since we're in this technology age, that texting and email is effective for communication in negotiations?
Yes.
And have you seen when it's not, when people get really hot and bothered? Have you received an email in negotiation where you can just see through the words that they're using that they're just literally emotionally charged? Have you ever had an email like that? I have.
No.
It's just important to pick up the phone, right? So if you get a counter offer, or you're negotiating with someone, or you went on a listing appointment and they said, well, this is what I think XYZ, I do think, hey, do you have a few minutes for a phone call? Don't reply to that email with a whole, 3 paragraphs of stating your case, that stand model, right? Get on the phone and do ask those questions, do go back into their motivation, but don't do it through email. So be careful about that. All right, so let's go to the E and the S. Then we have one more S, which is sound logic at the end, which is probably the most important one. Exchange, right? So when you're negotiating, realize that you need to bring up that you're trading things. So I always joke, it's like, I don't know if it's a trend now, but Pokemon cards, like literally we would trade cards. I remember in grade school, like, oh, I want this one for this, or Cabbage Patch Kid cards. I don't know if you remember. Am I too old to? So think about an exchange. So when you've presented offers to sellers or buyers, like, okay, well, you want this, which we're going to give this to you, but I need you to do X, Y, and Z instead, right? So that exchange. So always kind of think about how there's a mutual benefit so it's a little bit of like, think about it as like tally marks, right? So you give them 2 things on their terms and conditions. What 2 things can you get on your side of the fence with 2 things and 2 terms? It's really important that you vocalize what you just did, because there's an assumption that they know that you gave them the washer and dryer, right? If you're the listing agent, well, we let you have the washer and dryer. We wrote it into the offer, and we're letting you have the washer and dryer, but we need $2,000 more in price, right? So we've got to kind of look at that exchange and make sure when you're communicating in a negotiation that you're doing that. You're showing that exchange ratio. And if someone's not giving anything, right? So if it's counter offer and they just keep bumping you and your client's not getting anything in exchange, you need to be able to say, hey, we're looking towards a win-win here, but you haven't given us anything in exchange for what you just countered, right? So you just went from 350 to 365, but you haven't changed you haven't given in any way possible, right? You haven't exchanged you haven't given us the washer and dryer. You haven't given us an opportunity to get more value out of the transaction. And then sameness is really where the high I comes in your personality. You need to find that connection in that negotiation. A lot of times in a heated discussion or in negotiation, you need to just kind of get yourself in a space where you compliment them. And even the jerks, even the ones that are a very fierce competitor, like they have that competitive, remember we talked yesterday, that competitive approach, you need to find a way to compliment them. So the one I use a lot when they're super aggressive is, wow, I really love that you have so much passion for your client. My AKA is, you're being a little ridiculous and your energy is a little over the top, but I'm doing it in a way that compliment them their passion, right? And so we can obviously, if you've ever been in a heated argument with a spouse or partner, you can see that passion, right? They care about the relationship enough to kind of fight through that issue. Think about that in negotiation as well. So that sameness is finding something where you can compliment them. Wow, you know what? I know we're in a rough transaction right now with getting this repair addendum wrapped up, but you are so professional. You answer my phone call, you reply to my emails, and I just want you to know that that is not the case in a lot of transactions I'm dealing with. So I don't know if this deal will work out. I hope it does, but I just want to just take a point before we kind of go over this counteroffer that I really appreciate the fact that you've been so professional and so quick to respond. That is a great way to kind of, again, get that emotion level back down kind of towards the center. And they typically say, oh, I appreciate that. Or, you know, I feel the same way. I think, you know, I'm not sure we get it done either, but, you know, I do think you've been really professional to work with this too. They tend to mirror and match sameness, depending on that. And it's a little bit of an icebreaker. So exchange and sameness inside the success model. What do you feel about those two? Have you ever done a conversation where you're trading something and then also like that sameness, that complement? What's your experience with this part of the model? And Bernice and Catherine have been playing. So who else is going to play with me?
So when you were talking about, you know, the one you were just talking about, my brain's not working today.
The sameness,
Yes.
rebuilding like and trust. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think that one, I got to kind of do a little bit of each on the last transaction, because there were tense moments where we thought after all this time the deal was just going to fall through and the seller was getting frustrated, which was understandable. But in the end, when I talked to the agent, because every time something, you know, bad or negative or concerning came up, instead of texting her, texting her, emailing her, I immediately called her. And at the end, she said, you know, thank you for that. She goes, a lot of people just think nowadays they want to text, but it was reversed. She was thanking me and made me feel really great, because
she's finding sameness. Yeah.
Yes. And I really appreciated that. So it is really good to hear. And I took a note to myself. I was like, not only am I going to send thank you cards to all of my closes like I do, I think I need to, if the other agent is just as similar sameness and shows that same respect, I want to make sure I tell them that in person at the end of the deal as well.
Love that. Great example of that. My joke is, you know, we're in a heated discussion or negotiation, and my seller or my buyer wants this and they want that, and we're like pulling our hair out, right? And I go, oh my gosh, I don't know about you, but I think I need a drink after this deal wraps up. Like, and it just breaks the ice. Like, the sameness is, we're in this together. We know it's a stressful point in the transaction, and you're just acknowledging it, and then you're doing a compliment, or you're cooperating, or you find that connection. You know, bring up their dog. Like, oh my gosh, I know this is totally a squirrel moment, but I saw that you have a Pomeranian. That's such a cute dog. What's your dog's name? Because I saw it on Facebook. Like, I know that seems weird in negotiation, but you gotta break that tension, because people are at this escalation phase, and if you don't break that, it causes immense stress in the transaction when you're negotiating. So I think exchange and sameness is really important. All right, the last one in this model, let me zoom this little guy out of here, is that sound logic. Make sure that you're referencing things that you can read, right? So when you're negotiating things, the contract terms, and I don't necessarily think you have to read the paragraph to the person. I don't know who I was on the phone with yesterday or the day before, maybe someone on this call, but was it Gwen? I don't know who it was. And they were, was it the other day you were saying, was it you, Gwen? Where you were saying, I felt bad because, like, this guy's older and he didn't really know the contract, but he's been in business for 30 years. Wasn't that what you were saying?
No.
Is it you? I talked to so many agents in the day. So basically in conversation, it was, they weren't following the contract. The listing agent wasn't following what the contract said. But he kept saying, you know, I've been in the business for 30 years. I know what I'm doing. And the agent on the other side of the transaction was like, well, but the contract says you only have 14 days to do this, right? So always try to reference for sound logic, because we want them to be not an opinion, we want it to be logic, is reference everything you can specifically inside a contract. So if you're negotiating repair addendum that says, hey, I understand that, you know, the seller doesn't want to fix the deck that's coming off the house. But if you look at page 64 in the repair report, it says that it actually is a structural defect and it could cause harm because it's pulling away from the house. So I'm just telling you from a third-party reference point or from the home inspector's point of view that this is a concern for my clients. And so we want to make sure we can figure out a way to make this a win, right? So that sound logic is bringing up the fact that it's physically documented somewhere. And it's doing it in a way that's not saying, nah, I see, I got you, it's in writing. It's done in a way that you can just reference back that says, this is a third party neutral person that doesn't have any skin in the game. And they're saying that they recommend us to do this. Or this is something that we know is part of what we agreed to in the contract. And maybe we just need to go back to that paragraph because that's what we all agreed to. So it's kind of the sound logic uses them to get back on track based on a logic. So in recap of the model, if you kind of look at success, I put these in a form of a question because we want to kind of see how do we negotiate. So the S, what is their self-interest for an outcome, right? What is the ultimate plan? How unique is your offer or our offer? What comparable options do we have? What will we trade for equal value? S, what do we have in common, right? Which is that is sameness. And then what evidence can we present to state our case? So that's the success model that allows us to kind of navigate our way through a negotiation transaction. And this would be something, in my opinion, that you print and you put up on a corkboard. So when you're in a stressful transaction, you could look at this model and say, what parts of this can I use? If I'm in a volatile transaction, how can I de-escalate it using the model of success? So what do you guys think of that? Thumbs up? You like that model? It's pretty easy to remember. It just takes a little practice to keep going. All right, so let's finish up the ACE model, which is on page 11 of your workbook. ACE, accumulate information, create value, claim the value, and then execute the contract. So this one's actually very similar to some of the other models. This may just be an easier one for you to remember. So kind of think of it as ACE in your hand, right? So if you use an ACE model, you should be able to really have leverage or negotiate your way through almost anything, right? So accumulating information is what you've always been taught through questions and through even the first part of the models of negotiation is you got to go in there and start digging deep into the questions, right? If you're negotiating with your client or you're negotiating with the listing agent, the more questions you can ask them front, which is accumulating information, it can allow you to see if there's anticipating any other issues, right? So really important, like let's say the listing is sold as is and you represent the buyer and you're getting ready to write an offer. I would interrogate why they chose to list it as is. Like, hey, I'm curious, you guys say on MLS it's as is. What's the reason why the seller chose to market it that way? Well, he just doesn't want to make any repairs. Okay, he doesn't want to make any repairs. I understand that. Is it because he feels like there's a lot of work to do on the house? What is the reason why he kind of made that decision? Does he not have a lot of money that he can't fix up the repairs? So he just felt like that was the path of least resistance. Well, yeah, he's going, and they'll just blurt out the world, right? So accumulate information is super important when you're trying to figure out, you're the detective, you're gathering as much information so you can go back to your fort and devise a plan or come up with the offer. Create value prior to negotiations. This is great. When you're calling the listing agent before you present an offer is, hey, what would make this a win for your seller if I wrote it into the contract? Well, they really need to close in 30 days. All right, so if I could figure out a way to get my lender to kind of get things tightened up, and we presented an offer in 30 days, with that would give us kind of a little bit of an advantage in the other offers that you have. Yes, that would be something we would definitely love. So creating value early on is that almost that uniqueness that we talked about. Like, okay, there's 4 other offers, but mine is unique in the fact that I gave you a 30-day close, which is what you said your seller needed, right? So think about that create value. You got to think about it ahead of time. That's prior to negotiations on how, and then when you go into negotiations, you bring up the create value, right? You say, hey, I know you got 6 other offers. I know you reviewed our offer and you're countering us. But one of the things you told me was that you wanted a 30-day close, and we made that happen. I really worked hard to get that going through. So was that not as important as price? Because now you're coming back to me with, countering at a higher price, but you said the hot button was the 30 days. So something changed there. I'm just pointing back out my first C there, which is that's what you told me what I want. And then claim value for clients using the proven negotiation skills, like going back through and say, these are the things that we asked for, and this is what you offered to do, right? So going back, that claim value is that this is what we agreed to. So let's execute the contract. Let's sign the repair addendum because this is what we all know needs to get done to wrap it up. And then execute the contract obviously is just ratifying it, but then just making sure those deadlines and those contingency periods don't lapse, right? If we're not careful with that. So the ACE model is really, in my opinion, is taking all of the models that we've learned in the last 2 days and wrapping them up in a big package, right? It's kind of taking them in a more of a simplified version of the SAM, the BATNA, and the success model, but it's kind of wrapping it all in one big box. So before we go into building trust and we go into multiple offers, what do you take away from the 4 models that we've learned in the last 2 days? Do you feel like it's going to allow you to negotiate better with transactions that you're going through now? And do you think it's really applicable to our climate in real estate right now in the COVID world that we're living in? Give me your feedback on these models. Which one's your favorite, maybe? Which one do you not like? Give me something.
I like them all. I think they're very helpful during this time because you're having to rely on, a lot of communication type skills.
Yeah.
Even though we still want the face-to-face and all that, even making a phone call, you need these skills to pull things in. And there's a lot of people kind of doing the same thing, so.
I love how you said it's a communication. So if you really boil all of them down, this is just communication models, right? This
Exactly.
is how we talk to each other as humans or as spouses or partners, or as we talk to our children. Like we negotiate all the time, right? So I love that you said it's a communication thing, especially more now than ever. Because when people are fearful, when there's so much change and there's so much uncertainty in worlds around us, communication is how we calm or calm the nerves or kind of, silence those big waves that are crashing at us. So I love that you use the word communication because that's what all these models are built to do, is just to find a flow. Okay. Anything else? One more person, anything that they like or dislike before we go into trust and multiple offers? One more.
I like the last one.
Yeah.
Why for some reason it's just short to the point for me, and I can keep it in my head a lot easier with the picture of the card. I don't know, for some reason it just, after watching the yesterday's this morning and then this one today, the ACE one stuck with me, and I like that one.
I think keep it simple, right? So whatever model speaks to you, you don't need to use all four all the time. You need to find one that makes sense for you. You may even, I sometimes morph like the models. Like I'm like, I like the AC and then I'll use the SM on the other part. So like, it's okay to find, but what ultimately when you're using a model, you'll be able to start to go, oh, I got more out of this conversation, or I got this negotiation a little bit more effective because I've grabbed some of the little particles of the model. I agree. ACE is super simple, which is good. Don't make it complicated. All right. So the last part before we go into kind of a little mini master. What's that?
May I say something, please?
Of course. Of course.
So I like the ACE model because I like when you ask all the questions. So I think I function better when I have all the information, when I have more information.
Yes. If you don't go with the ACE with accumulated information, then you're going in blind. You are. And then you're tap dancing through the whole negotiations and you feel like you're on pins and needles and you're stressed out. And so when you have all that information and you've got it all written down, you don't also, one thing I should also say about accumulated information, you don't have to share all that information. So even with your own clients, like if the listing agent tells you something that's a little grumpy, or a little bit out there, you don't have to say, well, let me tell you what this listing agent told me. Like it's got to be used appropriately. When you're accumulating information, doesn't mean you need to be the spew out all the data to that other person. You can be strategic. There's no ethical violation that says that, right? So you need to be able to, so many times I'll have somebody in negotiations, let's say the lender calls and they're saying, oh, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. And they literally call their client back and say, oh my God, I just talked to your lender. There's so many challenges they got. Like, we don't need to do that. Like, yes, you have accumulated all the information, but you don't need to tell your buyer client all that stuff. Like, you can sift through the good, the bad, and the ugly and figure out strategically what you're going to provide them. Because when you're negotiating, you just word vomit. It's not going to be good for you, but I love that too. All right, so it all kind of wraps up with trust. If you don't, so he who does not trust enough will not be trusted. I can tell you, you can sense trust within 3 to 5 seconds. When you're doing a new transaction or you're meeting a seller or a buyer for the first time, there's a central vibe of do they trust me? Do I trust them? Is there this common ground? And either it's going to develop and prove itself true, either way. I knew that listing agent was slimy, or, oh, I knew this buyer was just a little not telling me the truth or hiding some stuff. So that we need to make sure we realize that it's all built on trust. So if it kind of go, Stephen Covey's my guy. I don't know if you guys have ever listened to any or listened or watched that. Have you ever read any of the books? He's got many books, and it's on business and management, and it's not on real estate, right? But he talks about the speed of trust. He talked about the core of credibility and building trust. The first one is integrity. Second is intent. Third is capabilities, and the fourth is results. Realize at the end of the day, your complete reputation on how you negotiate is built on the trust that you build with that person. How you build trust with your buyer client, if you're representing them, seller client, or if you're building trust as a cooperative agent inside the transaction with an MLS agent partner, right? So we need to make sure you're walking your talk. Like if you say you're going to do something, or if you say your client's going to do, and you agree to terms and conditions of it, make sure you're doing the right thing. And I've literally had to get the grass cut. I've had to hire a cleaner to clean the house because I knew I said I was going to have the house ready to go, and my seller just didn't do what they needed to do. They didn't follow through with the what we agreed to, and I had to just suck it up and pay for it. Intent is that fundamental agenda, the behavior that follows it behind. So everyone is acting in the best interest. So if you start to see that someone feels like they're sneaking around or they're not telling the full truth, right, because you didn't ask the right question, you need to be able to say, well, the intent of our conversation was X, Y, Z, or you shared with me this information, and now it's contradicting what's happening. So help me understand what has changed there. That intent is the important part. And if you're ever in a lawsuit, that is what they're trying to figure out, is what was the intent of the contract? What is the intent of this addendum that you created? What was the purpose? Why was it created? And when you're in negotiation, That trust, if someone breaks that intent, all gloves are off. Wouldn't you guys agree? Like, that's a big deal breaker. Capabilities, make sure you guys, I think it's that the talents, right? So you need to bring people in your world and resources that have the right attitude, the talents and skills. If you hire someone to do the repair addendums, or your seller hires someone to do repairs from the repair addendum, make sure they're skilled and they have the attitude that they want to fix it the right way. They're not trying to, my friend, they don't half-ass it. They're going to do it with integrity. They're going to do it because they trust that they want to have a good product at the end. And I understand price is a factor, but if they don't have the capability of doing a good job, you shouldn't be recommending those type of clients, especially when you're negotiating in a transaction. And then the last thing is results. I think it's important, and maybe, I don't know if you guys do this, is I pull up the agent that I'm dealing with and I see how many houses they've sold. Everybody has an MLS ID. I go in there and put their MLS ID for listings and pull an MLS for buyers. I go in there and see how many transactions. It doesn't mean that is face value. Maybe they're new and that's okay too. But do they have a track record of success? Do I see them working more with buyers or sellers, right? So if I'm in a transaction with an agent and he represents the buyer, I pull it up and he's only done listings. His negotiation style is probably going to be lean towards the seller because that's just what he's been doing most of the time. If he sells 20 houses and 18 of them are representing a seller and only 2 represent a buyer, and I'm on the flip side of a transaction, his results and his track record are going to influence how he negotiates. It's going to influence what he does moving forward. Does that make sense? So what do you think the ideal factors, we talked about the 4, that you think establish trust in negotiation? I want to end with that, and then we'll end with a mini mastermind. What do you think builds trust in a negotiation transaction?
I think
Anything?
communication is a big deal.
Say that again. Sorry,
I think communication is a big deal.
Yeah. Because what do you mean by that? So if they don't communicate with you, does that feel like they're like sketchy? Like, is that what you're saying as well? Or...
Like, yes, but I think just the way, like, I think just communicating everything that can be communicated is really important, because then, like we've said yesterday, we really are all a team and we're all trying to get the same result for our clients. So let's try to work this together. So you're obviously coming from a good intention already. Yeah.
So I definitely think that communication piece is that link to trusting that person for sure. And I love that. Anybody else?
It's some competence and follow through. I don't know if I look at the contract. I do all that. I pull them up. I look and see, try to see who you're dealing with. But when they send me a contract and they have the buyer's name and the sellers and it just, I don't know. It just makes me think they're not really paying attention. They're fast and that kind of thing. So I do look to see how
their competence,
how they care. Yeah.
So I love both, because I think it actually goes into that results, like their reputation and track record. We probably could add the word competence in that space too, because if they're making small errors on the contract here and there, or they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I misspelled this person's name, and we all are human. But does it start to show that there's something that we're missing? Are they overworked? Are they just not detail oriented? Do they not know what they're doing? Like, it starts the question, or do I really trust this person as I go through the transaction? Good point.
Exactly.
All right. So I just wanted to bring up that trust, because I think if you're going through all of these models and you don't have that gut check that you trust that person, and I've represented my own clients and I didn't trust them. I hate to say that. But I was like, hey, Mr. Seller, I need you to paint the kitchen. And he's like, yeah, I'll have it painted by Tuesday. And then I show up on Tuesday with my photographer and the kitchen's not, it's not painted. And I was like, what? Like, why wouldn't you have told me that you didn't paint the kitchen? Like, now I have to reschedule the photo shoot. That starts to show like, ooh, like, what are they doing? Like, why are they? It's not a lie, but they didn't follow through with what they said they were going to do, right? So, and I've had those clients, and I hate to say it, then they're the same clients that don't cut their grass. It's a foot tall, I got to go cut it. Or, hey, they left I had one where they left a piano in the house. It was like literally like an old piano, and I'm like, what the heck? You have to get rid of all your furniture. Well, they didn't want to pay somebody to move this heavy piano. But you can't just leave it for the buyer. Like, that wasn't negotiated in the transaction. Get the heck. So that starts to question a lot of that stuff for sure. All right. Well, let's kind of mastermind for a few minutes on multiple offers, because I anticipate everybody is going through that right now. The first thing I want to say is that you need to consult your broker always, because there's going to be things, if you are going to be in multiple offers, that you're removing or modifying contingencies within the agreements, and it does put your client at risk. So do not do it haphazardly. Do not just mark it up in a purchase or a listing agreement and send it off through DocuSign or AuthentiSign, and they just sign it randomly. You need to have a really frank conversation with the risk, because every contingency you lift or you modify, or any paragraph that you modify inside our agreements, you're creating holes, big holes in that. Now, we have, a lot of times right now in our market, we have to create those holes because we can't even get a seat at the table. Like, they won't even look at our offer unless we don't do it. You know, example is an optional paragraph, right? So in Richmond market, we added this new paragraph about a year ago that's optional, that, hey, if they don't present you don't present a repair addendum, you can get out of the home inspection, no questions asked. Well, a lot of people are not using that anymore, because that's like, don't check that optional paragraph. But it does create different risk on different sides of the fence. So make sure that when you're talking to your client about negotiating, writing an offer in a multiple offer situation, you tell them the risk of why we're doing it. And then I would recommend you sending in an email that recaps that. I've even seen where people actually type up like an addendum that says, okay, you're agreeing to waive the home inspection, waive the appraisal contingency, and waive the HOA 3-day right of rescission. You understand that there's a risk involved, that these contingencies removed will limit your ability to remove yourself legally from the contract. Sign here. It's just an enforcement. It's just a recap that says, you understand, once you pass go, you can't go back. Like, once we got the house, yay, we're the winner of the multiple offer, and now they want to get out with the HOA. Well, you waived the HOA. Or, oh, now it's $10,000 over the appraised value, and you have to pay that. Well, you can't go back and say, just kidding, I'm not going to pay the 10 grand, right? So make sure you're doing that. So I'm going to give you the 10 tips that what we're seeing in the market right now for multiple offers. But I want to make sure you don't just jump to the 10 tips. You have to make sure you do a risk assessment. Does everybody understand why I'm saying that? Does everybody understand the legal ramifications of not doing that?
Yes.
So one question, you said always consult the broker. So when we have a multiple offer situation, we should be calling Kathy and saying, here's what we're doing with the contract?
I feel like it should be, this is the off. Yes. I mean, I think it needs to be discussed with all parties, and your broker is part of the transaction because they're actually the one involved. You can just say, hey, I've advised my client of multiple offers, and these are the 2 contingencies that we're waiving. I just wanted you to be in the loop that I did advise them of that. I did, recap an email that stated what the risk is. She probably doesn't need to reply to it. She doesn't need to give you necessarily counsel on it, but she needs to be in the loop that you're kind of doing things that are outside if you're just using a fill in the blank contract, don't send it to her. But if you're modifying some big chunks of the transaction, it wouldn't be bad for Kathy to look at that and give you a thumbs up, or at least have awareness of it. Does that make sense?
Drew,
Yeah.
I know that she really is for that optional paragraph. Are we to send that to her every time that we don't check that? Because nobody wants that checked right now. At least I haven't come across anyone that wants that checked.
That's a good question. I mean, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I think you have to make a business decision. And I think you have to make sure you've advised your clients and you have documentation that you've talked about it, right? So, hey, we've decided, we're not going to do the optional paragraphs, which is fine. We understand we're in a competitive market, but we will have to go through the entire process, like stated in paragraph 16 of the home inspection. Want you to be aware that that's the pro and the con of not checking that box. And I think as long as you do that, I don't think, I mean, Kathy's not going to micromanage you, but she wants some type of, if there's some blowback, she can say, well, your agent gave you the pros and cons of it, and you made a conscious intent. Remember, it's about intent. You intended to move forward because you knew that you were waiving that right. Does that make sense? I would say just cover yourself on documentation would be fine.
Correct. Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. All right, so these are some of the things, and these are not all of the things, but these are some of the things that we're seeing. If you are in a situation where you see a listing that is in delayed showing status, people are writing offers. There's a sight unseen addendum, right? Limiting that. So you have every right. It's active, but it's with delayed showings. It's not coming soon. It's delayed. It's active, but a delayed showing, right? Sometimes people are doing that to kind of get through the open house or to whatever reason they choose for the delayed showing. So understand that, getting to the seat at the table first makes a big difference. And you'll also see number 9 kind of goes into the same thing. It says, don't wait to showings on the weekend. If that house pops up on a Tuesday and you think your client is going to wait for the weekend, you're probably going to set them up for a multiple offer situation. Go show it on Tuesday and make it happen on Tuesday. That's what you need to do. Multiple offers on number 2. We've probably talked about this a lot, but you should be surprised how agents don't know what an escalation clause is, and they've never been trained or coached to do it. So you're kind of in a brokerage where it's a little bit different. We definitely highly communicate escalation clauses. But remember, this escalation clause is if they have another offer. So don't use this in negotiation. If they don't have any other offers, don't throw an escalation clause there. That's why you're going to have to communicate with them ahead of time. Hey, do you have any other offers right now? No. Okay, well, I'm going to send the offer right now, and there's a deadline of 5 o'clock today. Okay, great.
But some strategies are not to let you know there are multiple offers. So sometimes you have to use the well, you don't have to,
Good point.
but you use the escalation clause. But my method usually is not to say, because to me, you're darned if you do and darned if you don't.
Yeah.
If you have a bunch of offers, sometimes people don't want to get involved. And if you say you have no offers, they think, well, I got plenty of time, so I just tell them my client has said not to say.
Yep. And that's actually who was in our meeting a couple of weeks ago. Was it Peggy Lynch? I don't know who it was. But she was saying, like, hey, do you have any other offers? You actually have to ask your seller if they want to disclose that, because like Gwen said, you don't have any other offers, then they're going to lowball you because they think, oh, well, there's not a competitive market, right? My client has just advised me not to tell you if there's multiple offers. So I agree. Escalation clause allows you to kind of go in blind with a little bit of a strategy for negotiation, for sure. Appraisals, right? We have 3 options inside that appraisal paragraph. You need to know that appraisal paragraph very, very well. Appraisal paragraph in a very simplified version, which you need to go to contract class with Kathy and RAR, basically says, if it doesn't appraise, the buyer can pay the difference, the seller can pay the difference, or if you can't come to terms, you can terminate the contract. That's where it is, right? So if you're going to say that the buyer is going to pay the difference, make sure you know that's an option. I literally hate this one because I think it's creating a upside down approach. Like they're overpaying 20 grand for the house. Well, they better live in the house for 10 years because I don't think it ever is going to, but that's happening. So if you're in specifically the city or hot pockets of Bon Air, people are waiving the appraisal and the buyers are paying cash out of pocket if it doesn't appraise. You could also put a cap on that and say, in the event it doesn't appraise, my buyer will pay the first $2,000 of the difference. Maybe that's a little bit of a protection. That's not just giving them a blank check and saying, if it doesn't appraise, here's a blank check and my buyer will pay 20 grand. So maybe putting a cap on it. Again, there's a reason why there's a contingency for appraisals, because why would you buy a house that's not worth market value? And the definition of market value is what it's willing to pay, the buyer's willing to pay, and it has to appraise based on if you are getting a loan. So that appraisal contingency is really important that you explain that, because this buyer needs to understand that. Personal letter, I've actually had a mixed bag of emotions on that. Some people feel that you need to be careful about that for fair housing. So people can judge a book by its cover. They can look at someone's name and interpret it of their race or ethnicity. I've also seen people adding family photos to it so they can see dogs or they can see kids. And there's a natural bias that we all have, right? So if a seller gets a letter, make sure it's written by the buyer's perspective. You don't write it. Make sure it's done in a way that is getting to the emotion of why they're buying, right? So that's tapping into that logic versus emotion. But I do want it to be simple, like Sam and Julie, not or sincerely future homeowner, right? Or don't put photos of them in there because we don't know if that letter is going to help or hurt, but it has helped a lot. A lot of times people telling a story about how they've saved up money and that this is their dream neighborhood and they've always wanted to live here, and that tugs at the seller's motivation to choose the right offer. So personal letters from the buyer to the listing to the seller has been effective. Repair limits, creating a situation where they're either going to pay the portion first, right? So, hey, in the event there is repairs and there's a cost to cure, our purchaser will pay every item that's $250 or less. Or similar concept, my buyers will pay the first $2,000 of the total cost to cure list, right? And there's specific language that you need to advise with Kathy or Amy or contract coach to get you to word it correctly, but know that you can put repair limits that maybe make a difference. EMD, skin in the game, right? We always coach you to put 1% in there. Put a little higher in there, 300,000, it's $3,000, maybe bump it to 6. There's no magic number there, but if you're comparing offers, sellers see that your buyer has a little bit more cash in the EMD spot, that may influence them to choose your offer. Loan types, this is something you can't always control, but if you are in the driver's seat, this is the uniqueness. So when you're presenting a negotiation, conventional typically is what we see as the strongest offer right now. And so it's got that larger down payment. It usually means that buyer's credit score, there's some things. FHA, USDA, BHDA, those are typically that first-time home buyer where they don't have as much cash. Their credit score maybe is not as high. I mean, I'm generalizing here. But if you can talk to your lender partner and say, yes, I know you have pre-approved them for FHA, but is there any way to get them into a conventional product? Is there any way to move some money around or to get it? Because I know if I present an FHA offer, it may not be looked at in the same light as a conventional offer. So make sure you're doing your homework behind the scenes because you want to set that up. If you can't, and that's what they got, they don't have credit scores or cash to get to that conventional level, you just have to realize that you got to be, you could be vulnerable in a multiple offer situation. Pre-approved versus pre-qualified. Pre-approved, they pull their tri-merge credit. Make sure when you're looking at your pre-approved letter from your lenders that you're going to send to the listing agent, that it says they pulled their tri-merge credit or they verified their income, meaning that this is not just a superficial, yeah, I checked their pulse, they're alive. I've actually dug a little deeper into the transaction, and I'm as far as pre-approval, and they've actually got their credit pulled. I know that they work at the job steady. I know their income is verified. So make sure the wording on the pre-approval letter is really in there. And if it's not, go back to your lender and say, hey, can you add some words in here that shows the strength of what you've done to get my buyer ready to go?
Hey, Drew?
Yes.
Can I ask you a question? It's
Of course.
going back a minute when you were talking about the deposit, how much skin they have in the game. I noticed on the MLS, when you're putting in your listing, it has a place for minimum deposit, pre-approval required, and all that. Does that carry any weight? I mean, like so if I put in, I want a $5,000 deposit on that, that has absolutely nothing to do with a buyer actually paying that.
Yeah, and MLS is a marketing, it's for marketing. This is what we suggest. This is what we think it should be, right? So I also get all the time, like, we're not accepting offers, or we're not reviewing offers until tomorrow at 3:00.
Right.
Well, that's a suggestion. That's not a demand. You can say, I'm writing an offer and I want it at noon. Because, so MLS is a marketing and a cooperative agreement that says, I'm offering this product to the public market and I'm going to compensate the agent for it, the cooperating agent. But a lot of those are suggestions. So if you do see those filled out, now, if you go under that bar, if it says EMD is no less than $5,000 and you do 4, you're probably not going to, they're giving you a hint here that you should at least have 5 in, right? So that may not be a great strategy of negotiation to get it to be an offer, but it's not required that you do it. Is that, get the answer to that question?
Yes, thank you.
Can I
And then,
ask a question on that?
sure.
So if somebody doesn't want to put an EMD, that's okay?
I guess it would be okay. It's
Or
just,
legal? I'm sorry.
it's just not going to have, you do have to have some skin in the game, like was what I call it, EMD. So I've seen $100, $200. I mean, I've seen something. I think it's going to be really challenging for you to negotiate a deal when they don't have an EMD. So is it legal? Can you do it? Yes. Have I ever seen it? No. Like, in the 15 years I've been in business, there's got to be some EMD. Because it just shows intent to purchase, right? There's no skin in the game, I think. So I would just always assume that it's 1%. And if they say, oh, I don't have $3,000 because it's 300,000, well, what do you want to put down? Okay, $1,000. Okay. Now it may jeopardize if we're in a multiple offer, but that's just what they have in the cash in the bank, and that's what they're going to have to go with.
Yeah.
And then number 9, we talked about don't show, wait till homes on the weekend. I do see historically a lot of people list properties on Thursday, right? So be hot to trot. Like, they list on Thursday, get in there and write offers by Friday. Saturday, Sunday, people are now back into a kind of a rhythm with work and school and stuff. The weekends are hotter, right? So make sure you're expressing to your buyers in a multiple offer situation that we need to go and show. We need to go today, like, not wait till the weekend. And number 10 is and this is really, you need to get your offers kind of pre-written and send it to the buyers. Number 1, it's a precursor of saying, hey, we're going to show this house and we're going to strike while the iron's hot. Because if you see a property at 2:00 and then you go to the office and type it up and then they send it through AuthentiSign and you don't get it to the listing agent till 5:00, it could be gone, right? So if you have a situation where you're showing 3 houses, the only thing ultimately that changes in a purchase agreement is obviously the terms and the price a little bit and the address. So you get it preloaded, get your buyer's information in there, get everything. Do you think the house that they're going to buy, and then be able to shoot it over quickly, like go to a Starbucks and just walk, shoot it to them. You can also bring an iPad. They could sign it with an AuthentiSign right in front of you. Don't just assume that you're going to write this offer at the office like we used to, email it over, and then you'll get it in the inbox of the listing agent by 5:00. It could be too late. It also shows you the motivation of the buyer. When you're saying, hey, I'm going to pre-write the offer of the house we're going to see today at 3:00. So if this is the right house, we can just pull the trigger and really get your offer in by 4:00 that same day. It shows how are they going to react to that? Well, I'm not sure I'm ready to go move that fast. Or, oh, I'm not sure. Well, then are you really showing them the house that's going to get them motivated? Because they may be motivated, but then miss the house because another offer was accepted, right? So that kind of takes us through anybody else doing anything in multiple offers that maybe I didn't put on our top 10.
What about the HOA thing?
Explain what the HOA thing.
Like the rescission on the waiting period for the HOA or not receiving the HOA docs, or I think the thing that Ainsley was telling me about actually was if the HOA came in and said, oh, you have to fix X, Y, and Z, you've put these papers down, you've got to take this all up. her buyers said, well, don't worry about
We'll
that.
do it.
We'll fix everything for the HOA.
Yeah, I definitely think the HOA is a thing. Like, we know all historically that there's a 3-day HOA rescission, right? And if you can tell the seller, hey, I'm not walking over the HOA, so we can just waive that 3-day HOA, that gives them some confidence that you're not squeamish, that you're not scared, right? So again, make sure you realize that you have to do that at risk, because they get that HOA packet, they wanted chickens in the backyard. Now the HOA and the restrictions say you can't have chickens. Well, guess what? You're buying a house with no chickens because you waived that HOA. So because you don't know what the HOA says and you're waiving that 3-day rescission and they don't like something in the HOA, again, it's all about risk management when you're taking these contingencies off the plate. But yes, HOA is a great suggestion of an option if you feel like it's going to give you a competitive advantage. Okay. Well, we're a couple minutes over time. The
One-
next, oh, go ahead. Yep.
Sorry. So regarding, I know the review, like when the offers are going to be reviewed, I know that you can come in early. I've actually had that on the listing side where they came in early and they were right. Their offer was out of the world and my sellers wanted to take it.
Correct.
So, and talk about emotionally charged agents, the ones that hadn't gotten in there yet, they would, but whatever.
It's part of the game that you play, right?
Right. And so in that situation, I just said, I understand your frustration. I'm just acting on my client's wishes, as I sure you are. So
And I would just say, well, why didn't you write, I'm curious, if you sound like you're pretty passionate about getting your client this house, I'm curious, why didn't you shorten your deadline?
why didn't you come see it?
Right?
Yeah.
So rather than being in defense mode of like justifying why you chose that offer because it's your fiduciary as the seller listing agent, I'm curious, why didn't you move your deadline up, or why didn't you look at it a day sooner, or why didn't let's not throw stones at this glass house.
Yeah. My deal is, why bother?
Yeah.
But my question is, so I have another one that's coming on the market tomorrow. We've been watching and watching. Wow, 14 days is a long time for coming soon.
Right.
So my question is, if we, they're saying they're going to be reviewing offers on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
If we come in early and say, hey, we want to hear by Friday, what if they say, sorry, we're going to reject it? Can we just write another contract?
Yep. Just keep submitting it. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, you're playing the game of rolling the dice that your offer is so good that they're just going to take it, right?
Yeah.
But the seller may have instructed, I want a competitive environment. I want to see 6 offers so there's just some people that just want to see,
Right.
Can I get, even though your house is your offer is $10,000 above asking, I want to see if I can get one that's $12,000 above asking. It's that competitive part of negotiation. So you don't know what the personality is of that seller. And so submit it. They say rejected. No, our deadline's Friday at 3. Okay. I'll submit a new one. Right.
Right.
So yeah, you just kind of have to keep, I call it like shuffleboard. You just got to keep moving those pieces around so you can get yours in the slot. So.
Right. So if I have a Forest Hill property and they are not, I don't think they're going to be able to come that much over asking price. I just submit what I have, or what they can do, and just forewarn them. I know you love this, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the challenge, is that when your client is in a tight financial position, they don't have a lot of flex up.
Well, yeah, or this is the top of their market.
Right. I think you got to go big or go home. Just put it the best you can. There's no fluff. You're kind of right at the bone, right? So they're at the top. You got to see if that'll get there. Sometimes I've literally seen it where they just accept the offer and they sign it, and you're like, shoo, thank God, because they didn't have $5 more, right?
Yeah.
But I've also seen it where they counter offer it another $2,000 and you're out of the game.
Right.
So again, it's that negotiation. It's just that, but again, it goes back to some of the models we're using. You got to ask questions like, hey, if we present an offer that's $10,000 above asking, like, do you feel like that would be enough to get us in a position where we're in the running to accept an offer?
Right.
Well, if they said, well, you know, we want to see all offers, well, that can give you a risk that they actually want more than 10 grand. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
all right. So just a reminder on the last thing, and then we'll end, and is that we have our kind of breakout sessions and our homework and our plan for 2021. Can you guys believe that we're there? I'm doing an in-session one in our training room on the 8th of October. Sorry, no, on the 21st, I think it is. I have to look at the calendar. I can't remember. So I'm doing one in the training room at Keller Williams, Midlothian. But if you can't attend this one's going to be virtual. So if you're either nervous about going into the training room for health reasons, safety reasons because of COVID, totally get that. Also, just from a time management standpoint, this may be better. So we're doing the one on the 8th at 11 to 12 noon, similar format of this. I'll give you a little bit of homework over the weekend so you can work on your business plan for 2021. And then we'll do a Monday session with a more of a breakout session style. So you can either go to the in-class session one, like I said, I think it's the 21st of October, or you can do the one on October 8th, which is the Zoom version. So pick one or go to both. I've seen some people say they need to hear it a couple times. So if you want to go to the Zoom version October 8th and then come into the training room on the 21st and kind of just fine tune your business plan, we want to do it in October. So really, we know our business is 60 to 90 day cycles. So you have November, December, and you can really start seeing results show up in January. So that's why we're doing it in October.
Okay. So I'm seeing October 8th and then self-guided homework, and then Monday, October 12th for the breakout sessions.
Yep. That's the 2-part for the virtual version. And then at the 21st, it's just 2 hours in the training room if you want to do that instead.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. I was confused. Okay.
No, it's a little bit of a creative new format to make it virtual. I just don't think you can do business planning very effectively if you do it all in one session because your brain gets fried and you need to interact with people. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's kind of the workshop for today. We will be announcing we do 2 workshops every month. So I don't know if you took advantage of the questions workshop we did at the beginning of the month and negotiations. All those links, recording links are available for you. We put them on YouTube and we put them in our closed Facebook group, and we also email them out. So if you ever want to go back and reference them, do so. And then we'll be doing this for October. And so I have one more workshop we're going to put together in October that I'm going to be announcing for you guys. So hopefully you guys are getting value out of the workshops. You feel like you're getting some knowledge. You feel like you're getting some training.
Definitely.
Good. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for your time. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you guys very soon. All right.
Thank you. Have a blessed
Bye,
day.
guys. Bye, everybody.